The Treaty of Medicine Creek was signed between the United States and Washington's native tribes. However, it is known to be one of the worst negotiations of the Native American tribes and has proved to be incredibly beneficial to the United States. This treaty is a frontier in history because it showed a geographical frontier between the United States and the Washington tribes.
As the United States begins a rapid period of industrialization and urbanization, a second immigration boom begins. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 20 million immigrants arrived, which caused the population of the United States to increase by 211%. Land was soon growing scarce and something had to be done. In Washington, the population had grown by more than 1 million people, and so a treaty was signed with the Washington tribes in order to receive more land. This treaty was known as the Treaty of Medicine Creek. The Medicine Creek Treaty was signed to uphold the needs of both Native Americans and United States. However, there is soon a problem in the people's lives.
A treaty is an official written agreement between nations. According to the preamble of the treaty was a set of articles of agreement and convention made and concluded on the Shinanam or Medicine Creek in the territory of Washington this 26th day of December in the year 1854 by Isaac I. Stevens, Governor and Superintendent of Indian Affairs on part of the United States, and the chiefs, headmen, and delegates of the tribes and bands of Indians occupying the lands lying round the head of Puget Sound, who, for the purpose of this treaty, are to be regarded as one nation, on behalf of said tribes and bands, and duly authorized by them.
As in other areas of the West, white settlers wanted the land occupied by Washington's native tribes. Isaac Ingalls Stevens was the governor of the territory of Washington at the time, and thus he held the title of Superintendent of Indian Affairs. Stevens and several native tribal leaders met in the winter of 1854 to discuss the treaty's terms. The United States offered $32,500 and rights to fish, hunt, and gather in their usual places for the tribes if they move onto reservations and surrender 2.5 million acres of their land. More specifically, the Washington's tribes were told that they would be given the money over a period of 22 years, with a portion being delivered every year. For example, they received $3,250 during 1855. Securing the tribes the freedom to fish at all usual and accustomed grounds and stations found in Article 3 of the treaty was necessary. Stevens' notes show that he knew that guaranteeing some rights for the tribes would be the only way to convince the tribes to sign the treaty. The tribes' right to fish was an important freedom and therefore influenced the contents of the future treaties, Olympia, Nia Bay, Point Elliott, and Point No Point.
Some additional conditions added in the treaty were that the tribes could not trade anywhere outside of the United States, and they were not permitted to start a war unless for self-defense purposes. They also had to release any slaves that they captured and were prohibited from drinking alcohol of any kind. The children of the tribes that signed the treaty were, however, allowed to attend industrial and agricultural school for a period of 20 years. The treaty was negotiated on December 25th. 1854, and was signed the next day, on December 26, 1854, at the Medicine Creek, or Shinanam. So, on the day after Christmas, the treaty was signed, under which the tribes gave up virtually all of their land, and in return were granted 3 small reservations, one for each of the Washington tribes. It would not be entirely accurate to characterize the signing of the Medicine Creek Treaty as a negotiation. Stevens knew what he wanted, and the tribes knew they had little room to bargain. In addition to this, many of the native signers of the treaty did not clearly understand the treaty and its terms. Benjamin Shaw, a translator of Stevens, translated the treaty's language into Chinook trading jargon. However, it was said to have been inadequate to accurate detail of the document's provisions. According to the records, the treaty was signed by the Native Americans, all 62 leaders. However, there is evidence to suggest that most of these signatures were forged. Chief Les Chai claimed to have not signed the treaty, along with his brother Quamin.
Nisqually Chief Plymouth and his brother Les Chai represented the Nisqually tribe in the Treaty of Medicine Creek signing. They, along with others, believed that the treaty was injustice. Chief Les Chai believed that the relocation of the Nisquallies from the river delta to the high forested land would harm the tribal culture. However, when Chief Les Chai and his followers protested in Olympia, Governor Stevens sent militia to get rid of the chief and his brother. Because of this, what would be known as the Indian War began. The Indians lost the war, and Chief Les Chai died on February 19, 1858, but their efforts were not without results. Governor Stevens once again gathered the Medicine Creek assemblage at Fox Island. The Medicine Creek Treaty was changed to relocate the Pullup and Nisqually reservations, with the Nisquallies getting more land at a location that included the Nisqually River and Muck Creek, part of the territory that the tribes had lived on for centuries.
By 1950, states began to claim that the tribes were draining the fisheries. They thought that the natives should have licensing and bag limits. A member of the Nisqually tribe, Billy Frank Jr., led a movement to stop this. By the 1960s, Frank and many others began to demand full rights. Thus began the Fish Wars, in which Native American activists wanted to use their fishing rights and were against the states, who believed that the tribes had an unfair advantage over fish. In 1970, the Department of Justice intervened, filing a lawsuit against Washington to enforce the Medicine Creek Treaty. It went to trial in 1974, and Judge Bull issued the decision that the Native Americans' treaty rights were not being exercised, as stated in the Medicine Creek Treaty. The state appealed, however, the Supreme Court upheld the Bull decision in 1979. The authentic treaty is on exhibition in the National Museum of the American Indian. It is a unique piece of documentary that is still stored now. However, there are also many other preservations that still exist.
The original grove of trees beneath which the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed had begun dying, and the last of the trees left standing was given the name Treaty Tree. However, by 1979, Treaty Tree had died, and in 2007 blew down in a windstorm. Because this original monument to the treaty had died, many additional monuments were created in memorial. Students from Timberline High School built their monument on a slope overlooking the Nisqually River Delta in 1976. The spherical form of the monument symbolizes the Indians' view of the circular nature of life. The straight steel beam symbolizes American society, linear and industrial. The sphere itself contains a time chamber filled with a copy of the 1854 treaty and copies of Lacey and Olympia newspapers to be opened more than a century later.
Another monument is near to the Nisqually Reservation, indicating it was 1.25 miles from a bronze tablet that had been placed where the treaty tree once stood. This event was a frontier in history because it gave permission of a physical boundary between land that belonged to the U.S. and land that did not. This event is also a frontier in trust because the tribes trusted the states for the first time to honor the treaty. This treaty shows a crucial part of history that unfortunately not too many people know about, and if the existence of this pact were not there, Washington's native tribes would not be confined to small reservations, and more Native Americans would also eventually become U.S. residents.
In fact, many of the monuments talked about were not very prominent. The Timberline Student Spear is covered in graffiti and littered with trash. The other monument is placed at a gas station. The history of Indian treaties is littered with broken promises and bad compromises. Every day that passes is a new day in history, so we learned, as we hope you learned, that we create tomorrow's history, and that every decision you make now and action you take will be a part of history tomorrow.